I did the challenge by using the Morse code alphabet, and I used the alphabet to solve the Morse code problem. I got my answers, and I hope you guys got the same answers as me, which are right there.
Chapter 17. Propelling Pine Cones. Although the track leading from Mustard Lane to the farmhouse was empty, Sam knew better than to think he could ride up it unnoticed. The windows of the old stone house faced down onto the dusty road like a sentinel's gaze, and he felt certain that at least one pair of curious eyes would see his approach. The farm itself looked as unfriendly as its occupants. The old house might once have been painted white, but a combination of Yorkshire's harsh winters and a lack of care had created a shade of mottled grey. The barns and outbuildings on either side of the house hadn't fared much better. Some were missing part of their roofs, and it looked like a succession of gales had ripped strips of wood from several walls. Although Sam couldn't see into those buildings, he was pretty sure that people could see out. So, after concealing the bike beneath a mound of bracken leaves, he traversed the woodland with its thick tree trunks and made his way towards the farm unseen. He kept his wits about him, pausing every 30 seconds to make sure that his were the only feet making noises. He was pleased not to hear any telltale twig snaps or leaf rustles. So far, Sam was alone. As he neared the farm, all that changed. Boisterous voices reached into the thatch of trees from the farmyard itself. Even before the tree line gave way to strong wooden fencing, Sam knew to whom those voices belonged. The sound of both Scales brothers was unmistakable. Sam's fingers reached for his sore eye as he peered around a gnarly tree trunk. Despite being caught up in the urgency of reaching Lily, he had been expecting to bump into Tom and Pamela by now, perhaps hiding somewhere within the tree line as he was. They had a head start on him after all, and a wriggle of worry had already begun to make Sam wonder why he had yet to find them. Unfortunately, he found the answer to that particular puzzle staring at him from the farm's courtyard. As courtyards go, the rectangular channel between the back of the farmhouse and its terrace of barns and lean-tos was crude and scruffy. Pieces of loved farm machinery sat rusting in corners like the bare bones of metal corpses. Several buckled feeding troughs slumped miserably against a farm wall, and a dripping water pump fed a damp puddle which was otherwise surrounded by a desert of worn cobbles and dirt. Yet it wasn't the farm's unkept appearance that alarmed Sam. It was the sight of Duncan and Vincent Scales accosting their latest victims. "What is it with you lot from London?" Duncan growled, jabbing an iron-strong finger into the middle of Tom's chest. "Don't you know what keep out means?" "Eh!" Pamela barked, reaching out to slap the boy's hand away. "That's assault." "Nay, lass," Vincent corrected her. When Sam saw a familiar sneer curl the lips of the youngest Scales brother like the snarl of a petulant dog, he knew what was coming next. "This is assault." Vincent stiffened his wrist before slamming his thick, callous palm into Pamela's shoulder. Her body hit the ground so hard that the loud slap launched a gang of starlings from the treetops. "Her dad's a policeman," Tom warned the brothers. "You'll cop it for that." "You mean he was a policeman?" Duncan snapped. "But he's away with the army like the rest of the town's do-gooders. Not much he can do from where he is, though, eh?" "That's right, Dunk," Vincent agreed, nodding as he stood over Pamela. His glowering eyes seemed to dare her to move. "Times have changed since Jerry gave the rest of Europe what for. Her dad and his like used to make our lives a misery before the war began." The boy's jigsaw of thick facial muscles creased into an even more unpleasant pattern as he began to talk in a voice that was clearly meant to be somebody else's. "Don't do this. Stop going there. You can't do that." "Ha ha!" Duncan joined in. "Well, there's no one around to stop us now, is there?" "Aye," Vincent continued, War isn't always a bad thing. Pamela glowered up at the brothers from the dusty courtyard floor. Even from his hiding place behind the tree trunk, Sam could sense his friend's fury. You two'll be locked up for talking like that, she scolded them both. Mamma says that good men are giving their lives to stop Hitler spreading his poison, and here's you two sounding like a couple of turncoats. Vincent pressed the thick sole of his boot hard against Pamela's shin, grinding it against her bone until he dragged a painful shriek from his victim. And who's going to lock me up? He sneered. Your dad? No, 'cause no one's here, are they? Now people like me and Duncan are running things. We've got as much food as we want, and no nosy Parkers are snooping around us no more. If you ask me, this war can last as long as it takes. Anger and loyalty were both urging Sam to rescue his friends. He had already scanned the forest floor for a potential weapon, finding the remains of a broken branch would make a handy club. Yet he knew that violence would get him nowhere. The brothers were too big and strong to be overpowered. Sam's bruised eye was a reminder of that. He was desperately trying to come up with a smarter plan of action when another familiar voice sent a shiver of fear skittering down his spine. I thought I told you two lazy horse to go and catch me some rabbits for tea, Mrs. Scales bellowed from beyond the farmhouse door. When the woman's hulking frame stepped out into the daylight, Sam was reminded that the two sons had inherited their troll-like features from their mother. If I have to tell you again, I'll... Oh! The large woman froze as her gaze bounced from Tom to Pamela. A disturbing grin pulled her lips wide. Well, well, well. No one told me we'd had guests. Snoopers, more like, Duncan said. Looking for trouble. Heavy footsteps carried Mrs. Scales across the courtyard. Trouble? There's no trouble here. Not as long as folks keep their noisy snouts out of our business. We came to see our friend, Tom told her. We just wanted to make sure she was all right. All right? Mrs. Scales came to a halt less than an arm's length from the children. Her unpleasant grin looked like it had been painted across her face. And why wouldn't that good-for-nout creature be all right? Somebody gave my best friend a black eye last night. Tom jerked a finger towards one brother, then the next. I reckon it was one of these. Clearly thinking that the presence of an adult made her safe, Pamela climbed up off the ground. Wincing as she rubbed her grazed shin, she scowled across at the two Scales boys. I reckon no one's safe with these two thugs on the loose. You should keep 'em all chained up. Chained up, eh? Mrs. Scales scratched her head. That's a very good idea, Pamela Groves. Maybe you get fancy ideas like that from your dad. Pamela shrugged. He'd lock these two up if he knew how they'd treated us. Aye, he used to be good at locking folk up. Mrs. Scales turned to her sons. How many times have I collected your father from them police cells? Too many times, Duncan griped. And always for nought, too. I mean, what kind of country locks people up for defending themselves? Vincent nodded enthusiastically. Not Germany. If the Germans went to war, Dad will be able to come home. Hang on, didn't Albert say that two kids were snooping around after him the other day? Aye, he did, Duncan agreed. He'd only got a good look at one of them, but I reckon it could have been these two. We don't even know who Albert is, argued Tom. We've got better things to do than snoop after your lodger, Pamela added. Still watching from his hiding place, Sam knew that Pamela had said too much when he saw a mixture of surprise and triumph push Mrs. Scales' caterpillar thick eyebrows halfway up her wrinkled forehead. The monstrous woman bent close to Pamela with a malicious grin. And how do you know that he's my lodger? Pamela fired a worried glance towards Tom. We... Duncan grinned in triumph. See, Ma? We told you these weren't snoopers. We'll know when Albert sees them, Vincent said. Where is he? Out, Mrs. Scales told them sharply. He'll be back soon enough. What do we do with these two till then? Duncan wondered. Let's give Pamela and her little friend a taste of her dad's medicine, shall we? Sudden fury seemed to darken Mrs. Scales's face as she pointed towards the nearest barn. Take 'em in there, and do as she suggested. Tie 'em both up. No, you can't. Pamela howled and Vincent dragged her towards the building. You can't do that. Tom seemed equally powerless to prevent Duncan from hauling him in the same direction. It's illegal. So is ignoring keep out signs, cackled Mrs. Scales, following them towards the barn doors. Sam watched aghast as the two brothers dragged his friends into the barn. It was like watching a scene from the black and white Hollywood movies he'd watched with his mother in the theatres back home in Bethnal Green. That had been before the war broke out, when life had been normal, but there was nothing normal about this. Sam's mind whirred between the decoded message and the strange behaviour of the Scales' family. Something was very, very wrong. Part of him wished that this was a scene from one of those movies. At least then he'd have a script which told him what to do next, and there was usually a happy ending. He was still trying to figure out his next move when a familiar figure crept from the shadows of one of the farm's outbuildings. Clearly preferring not to be seen, Lily checked left, then right, before dashing into the sanctuary of another shadow. She slowly navigated the terrace of buildings, skulking from one shadow to the next. As she drew near to Sam's hiding place, he could see that distress and fear had creased her face into an anxious knot. Tears streamed down her wet cheeks as she sobbed silently. Although desperate to tell his cousin that he was nearby, Sam managed to swallow his urge to call Lily's name. After all, if he was going to stand any chance of helping his friends, he would need to remain hidden. Yet Lily needed his help too, before she became the next hostage. It was a group of starlings which had returned to the branches directly above Sam's head that gave him the solution that he was looking for. As they flapped and hopped from branch to branch, squabbling like irritable toddlers, a storm of twigs and leaves and dislodged pine cones rained down on Sam's head. Grabbing a handful of pine cones, he gently propelled them into the farm's courtyard. They hit the ground and bounced a lot across the cobbles. Some pinged left, others ricocheted right. A couple, though, made it all the way to Lily's feet. She wiped her cheeks clean as she turned to find out where they had come from. When she saw Sam, her green eyes were pulled wide by disbelief. Relieved to have hooked her attention, Sam stepped out from behind his tree and urged Lily to join him. He watched out for prying eyes or shrieks of alarm until his cousin reached the safety of the woodland. Hugging each other, they retreated out of sight into the scrum of tree trunks. They have Tom and Pamela, Lily sobbed. They must have come looking for me, but Duncan and Vincent found them first. I know, Sam told her. I sent them here. Why? What's wrong? Sam dragged the crumpled slip of paper from his pocket. We went back to the beach, Lils. We saw someone sending more signals. Signals? Lily shook her head. How? Was it Albert? Morse code, Lils, Sam explained. Soldiers use it to communicate. Naval ships too. It can be sent by flashes of light. But I don't understand, Lily admitted. Who would he signal to? The only things out in the ocean are fish. He handed her the paper. Read it. Lily stared at the collection of roughly scribbled words. As she read the words aloud, her voice was barely above a whisper. Dears arriving. Target school in 48... Sam waited, watching his cousin read, then reread the words. Finally, she shook her head. It doesn't make any sense. What does it mean? There are some letters missing. All we can do is fill in the gaps. When Lily handed the paper back to Sam, it was as though the note were burning her fingers. I don't understand, Sam. Who did he send this to? Sam shrugged. He had asked Tom and Pamela the same question over and over again. They'd always arrived at the same terrifying answer. The Germans. Why? They're targeting soldiers, Lils, Sam explained. Look at the message. A new company moves into the school on Thursday. Corporal Timmins told me. That's 48 hours from last night, when he sent the message. I think the Germans are going to bomb the school and kill the soldiers, and someone's helping them. Having retreated even further back into the woodland, the two children discussed their next move. "We have to rescue Tom and Pamela," Sam insisted. "It's my fault that they've been caught up in this. They're innocent." "Where innocent?" Lily reminded him. "It's Albert is the guilty one here." "Let's not jump to conclusions," Sam warned, yet his mind was consumed by the guilt of seeing his friends taken hostage. He'd sent them here. He was responsible. If Lily was right, and it was Albert who had sent the message, then all the trouble was under one roof, and they had to stop it. "If we told Mrs. Scales," Lily started. "That won't work," replied Sam, his mind racing. "I'm pretty sure the Scales family are up to no good. They seem perfectly happy to be at war. It keeps them on top around here." Anger was turning his words to ash in his mouth, and he found himself trembling. Sam shook himself. "We need to rescue Tom and Pamela first." Lily shook her head. "They'll be safe, at least until Albert gets back. That gives us time to gather some evidence." Lily glanced back across at the stone farmhouse. "How?" "Albert has the attic room at the top of their house." Lily's finger jabbed towards a small window peering out from the roof tiles. "Where is he now?" "Dunno. I saw him go out about an hour ago." Her nostrils flared. He was smoking one of those disgusting cigarettes. Sam thought hard. If there was any chance that Albert was up to no good, they had to do something about it, and fast. He nodded as a plan formed inside his head. "So, one of us needs to get inside his room." Lily wrung her hands together. "We'll never get past Mrs. Scales. She's got a sixth sense for things that go on inside that house." Sam scanned the farm buildings in search of inspiration. Finally, he clapped his hands together. "We need to get her out of the house." "Oh, and how exactly are you going to do that?" Lily asked. "I'm not," Sam said. "You are." Chapter 18. Even empty rooms have secrets. The plan was a simple one, and it worked perfectly. From his hiding place at the corner of the stable block, Sam watched his cousin stroll into one of the smaller outbuildings. Moments later, she strolled out again, as though nothing had happened. She wasn't alone. A dozen white and brown chickens hopped and flapped through the barn door behind her. They clucked excitedly, clearly happy to be out in the sunshine. None of them were meant to be there. "Mrs. Scales, help!" Lily cried, racing towards the house. "The chickens have escaped!" In seconds, Duncan and Vincent's mother bolted into the yard. "Useless girl!" she howled, swinging the head of her broom towards Lily. "How did you let this happen?" Lily ducked away from the broom and didn't reply. She was too busy trying to swallow a fit of giggles as she watched her rotund host desperately trying to herd the chickens back towards the barn. "Stupid birds," Mrs. Scales growled. "Get back in there, or one of you will be for tonight's dinner." With Mrs. Scales fully occupied, Sam seized his opportunity, sprinting hard towards the house. He was up the 2 front steps and through the door in under 10 seconds. Lily quickly followed him into the hallway. "Go up 3 flights of stairs. Albert's room is the very last door." Sam nodded and began to bolt up the bare wooden stairs, 2 at a time. "Be careful," Lily urged, "and be quick." As Lily returned to the yard under the pretense of helping Mrs. Scales, Sam headed for the lodger's room. The stairs were steep, but adrenaline rocketed Sam up all 3 flights in seconds. When he arrived at the narrow wooden door, he was barely out of breath. Still, he paused in front of the door for a second or two, collecting his thoughts. As exciting as this was, Sam also knew that it was important, potentially life-saving. After all, if he found evidence linking the Scales' farm lodger to the Germans, and maybe information about the school bombing itself, the authorities would have to listen to him. It was his sudden realization which slowed him slightly, making him turn the door's iron handle with a little more caution. The door was unlocked and swung open on squeaking hinges. Sam stepped into the room and instantly felt as though his hopes were leaking out through his feet. At first glance, it looked unoccupied. The bed was made neatly, with sheets folded tightly at the corners. The writing desk had nothing on it. Even the chair in the corner of the room looked like it hadn't been sat on in weeks. In fact, the only obvious trace of Albert was a lingering smell of cigarette smoke and an ashtray half filled with crumpled butts beneath a brass lamp on the bedside cabinet. Though his body felt heavy and with disappointment, Sam began to look for potential hiding places. He found nothing but clothes in the dresser drawers beneath the open window, and only shirts and trousers were hanging in the small wardrobe. However, when Sam peered beneath the bed itself, he hit the jackpot. The suitcase felt heavy as he dragged it from its hiding place, and his stomach churned like a whirlpool as he released both brass clasps and pulled open the case. "No!" he hissed, as his eyes fell on more clothes and shoes. He pushed his finger under Albert's belonging, hoping to find something important hidden beneath. But there was nothing in the case, nor in the room, which suggested that Albert was anything but a lodger. Reluctantly, Sam admitted defeat. His initial buzz of excitement had now turned to a heavy churn of nausea as he headed back towards the bedroom door. They had been wrong. Albert was nothing but a lodger and a well-respected member of the community who didn't like being followed, and Sam was a fool. He had put his friends in harm's way over nothing but his cousin's hunch. Sam was about to leave when his foot struck the lip of something hard sticking up from the floor. He stumbled but didn't fall, and immediately turned to investigate what had tripped him: a loose floorboard. It was easy to miss. In fact, if Sam hadn't been dragging his feet with disappointment, he probably would have stepped right over it. The wooden strip took a lot of work to wrestle free, but when Sam finally managed to pry it away from the rest, he found himself staring down at something that clearly wasn't meant to be found. Reaching into the gap, Sam wrapped his fingers around the small leather ledger and pulled it free. Its pages bulged with loose sheets, and the warped covers were tied tightly together with a single length of twine. Rushing to the bed, Sam quickly untied the twine and let the book spring open. Sheets of scribbled notes fell onto the bed covers like banknotes. Sam picked them up one at a time, scanning their handwritten contents for clues and information. He gasped as he realised what they contained: lists of troop movements, sketch maps, a record of flight times from the RAF base, even the names of individual officers. The lodger had clearly been studying the local RAF base for months. Albert had been spying. "Who are you?" Sam had been so preoccupied with the contents of the ledger that he hadn't heard the gentle thud of footsteps climbing up the stairs, nor had he heard those same feet either enter the bedroom. Sam turned to face the newcomer. A tall man with stern, angular features blocked the doorway. Accusing dark eyes glared at Sam in recognition, and he no longer looked handsome. "What are you doing in here?" Sam didn't have any chance to reply. As soon as Albert saw what his intruder was looking at, he lunged towards him. Sam rolled away, but he wasn't fast enough. Albert crashed down on top of him. The lodger accidentally knocked the notebook and its pages onto the floor as a strong hand reached to pin Sam against a mattress. Smoke and ash poured from a cigarette which was still clamped between the lodger's lips. "You shouldn't be looking at that," Albert raged. "That's none of your business." Sam struggled to wriggle free, but Albert was too powerful. "You shouldn't be watching the RAF base," Sam wheezed. "That's none of your business." Albert clamped a hand across Sam's mouth as panic widened his eyes. Guilty sweat beaded across his forehead. "And you shouldn't have meddled," the spy snarled. "This is grown-up stuff." With his free hand, the lodger reached for the heavy brass bedside lamp. When he raised it above his head, Sam realised what was coming next. Kicking and squirming didn't help, so Sam did the only thing that he could think of. He sank his teeth into the lodger's hand. It was enough to weaken Albert's grip, and as a yelp from the lodger sent the smoking cigarette spinning onto the bedsheets, Sam rolled free and bolted for the bedroom door. Half running and half falling, Sam raced back down the steps. Behind him, Albert's heavy footsteps gave chase, followed by the worrying smell of a smouldering blanket. Sam burst from the house and out into the yard, closely followed by Albert. Both stopped momentarily in shock when they saw that the yard wasn't empty. 2 RAF jeeps were parked in front of the house, and several soldiers stood talking to Lily. Tom and Pamela. Tom was rubbing his head and seemed subdued by shock. Pamela, on the other hand, seemed more than happy to tell two newly arrived soldiers exactly what had been going on as they began to interrogate Mrs. Scowls and her two sons as to why there were two children chained up in their barn. Sam recognised one soldier as Corporal Timmins, who was lifting the stolen green bicycle into the back of a matching vehicle, but Sam no longer cared about remaining hidden. "It's not just them," Sam shouted as he sped across the courtyard. "It's the lodger. He's a spy." All eyes turned to look at Sam and his chaser. Several soldiers turned and squared their shoulders in suspicion, responding to the strange situation. "He's lying," insisted Duncan. "Don't listen to him," barked Vincent. "He's not even from round here." Behind Sam, Albert suddenly abandoned his chase. Spooked by the presence of the RAF soldiers, he veered right and bolted away from the group. "Don't let him get away!" Sam shouted, fixing Corporal Timmins with a desperate, pleading stare. "He's dangerous!" "Bring me that man!" Corporal Timmins ordered, instructing his soldiers to give chase. As two young soldiers sprinted across the courtyard, quickly gaining on the fleeing lodger, Mrs. Scowls saw her own opportunity to escape. After shoving an unsuspecting soldier onto the ground, she shoulder-charged her way past another with the skill of a rugby league forward, before disappearing into the gap between two of her outbuildings. Her two sons weren't quite as quick, or as lucky. As Vincent turned to make his own break for freedom, Pamela leapt onto his back, dragging him to the floor like a lioness felling a zebra. Duncan managed to evade the lunge of a soldier, but not the outstretched foot of Tom, which sent the cumbersome teenager sprawling, face first, across the dusty cobbles. "Oops, what a shame," Tom sniggered, kicking more dust and dirt towards Duncan's face. "It looks like there is someone around to stop you, after all." Once both boys were bundled into the back of a military jeep, Corporal Timmins turned to Sam. "What exactly is going on here?" he asked. "I told you," Sam panted. "They've been harbouring a spy." The corporal seemed confused. "It's the lodger," Lily told him. "We saw him signalling from the cliff top." "Signalling?" Corporal Timmins pressed both palms against his face, trying to massage away his perplexity. "How?" "He was using Morse code," Lily added. "Morse code, Lils. It was Morse code," Sam corrected her. "They're targeting your soldiers." "Sam decoded the message," Lily proudly announced. "Show him, Sam." Corporal Timmins stared down at the scrap of paper that Sam handed to him. After a second or two, he looked back up at the two children, and his expression was alarmingly serious. "Nobody will believe this. If you've made this up..." Sam felt panic rising in his throat. "There's proof up there," he tried, pointed back towards the house. "I found a book of his, full of details about your base and the soldiers at the school. The new billets." Shock sent the corporal's head rocking back, and he turned to search for the lodger. "Do you have the book?" Sam slapped his head and gazed up at the attic room. Thick black smoke was now billowing through the open window. I didn't, it's still in the room." "It's evidence!" Corporal Timmins looked anxiously towards the burning room. "If that goes up in smoke, it's just your word against his, and they'll never believe a child." Sam felt a knot of failure twist his gut. "Don't worry. Lily told them. I'll get it." "No!" Sam and the corporal howled together. It was too late. Lily was already sprinting across the yard towards the house.